The city sky, once a placid canvas of pale blue, had cracked open without warning. A sudden, violent thunderstorm descended upon the afternoon commuters, turning the bustling streets into a chaotic blur of motion and noise. For Clara, a single mother whose shoulders already carried the invisible weight of 1,000 worries, the downpour felt like a personal affront. She clutched a flimsy grocery bag in one arm, its paper growing alarmingly soft, while her other hand wrestled with a small, sputtering umbrella that was no match for the wind. Each gust threatened to tear it from her grasp, a perfect metaphor for her own precarious hold on life. She just wanted to get home to her son, to the small, warm world they had built together, but the storm seemed determined to drown her in its cold indifference. As the rain intensified, the symphony of the city became a cacophony. Car horns blared with impatience, their sounds swallowed by the percussive drumming of water on pavement and the deep, guttural rumble of thunder that vibrated through the soles of her worn-out shoes. People scurried past her like frightened animals, faces hidden under hoods and newspapers, their singular focus on finding shelter. Clara felt a familiar pang of isolation, a lone figure moving against a tide of anonymous desperation. Her thin jacket was already soaked through, and a cold shiver traced its way down her spine. She pulled the collar tighter, her thoughts drifting to the warm meal she had planned for her son, a small beacon of comfort in a world that felt increasingly hostile and overwhelming. It was then, through the shimmering curtain of rain, that she saw him. He was standing perfectly still at the edge of the curb, an island of calm in the rushing river of humanity. While everyone else fought against the storm, he seemed simply to be enduring it. He held a long, white cane, its tip resting on the flooded sidewalk, and his head was tilted slightly, as if he were trying to decipher the world through sound alone. The chaotic noise of the traffic and the storm seemed to disorient him, and he took a hesitant, uncertain step back from the street. In that moment, he was not just a stranger. He was a portrait of quiet vulnerability, a man lost in a world that had suddenly become loud, wet-day and utterly indecipherable to him. Clara's first instinct was to hurry past, to shield her own fragile world from any further complications. Her son was waiting, the milk in her bag was getting warm, and her own exhaustion was a heavy blanket. It was so much easier to look away, to let someone else be the hero. Yet she couldn't. Something in his dignified stillness, his silent struggle against the elements, resonated with a deep, forgotten part of her soul. It was the same part that fought for her son, that found hope in the cracks of despair. Taking a deep breath that felt like plunging into cold water, she shifted the grocery bag, tightened her grip on the umbrella, and turned away from her path home. She began walking toward him, a small woman with a small umbrella, about to make a choice that felt impossibly large. As she closed the distance between them, the world seemed to narrow to the few feet of pavement that separated two strangers. The roar of the thunder softened to a distant hum. The frantic energy of the crowd faded into the background. All that mattered was the small, fragile circle of dryness her umbrella offered. She reached his side, extending the shelter over his head without a word, a simple, unspoken gesture of shared humanity. The man flinched slightly at her sudden proximity, then turned his face toward her, his unseeing eyes searching the space where her voice should be. This small act of kindness, born from a fleeting moment of empathy, was a seed planted in the heart of a storm, destined to grow in ways neither of them could ever predict. The man, whose name she would later learn was Arthur, seemed to sense her presence more than he saw her. He turned his head, his expression a mixture of surprise and caution, as the relentless drumming of rain on his coat was suddenly replaced by the softer patter on the thin fabric of her umbrella. Clara offered a small, hesitant smile that he couldn't see, her voice barely a whisper above the storm. "It's a bit of a downpour," she said, stating the obvious. For a moment, the two stood in a fragile, shared silence, a tiny island of stillness in the chaos. Clara felt a powerful urge to just point him toward the nearest crossing and continue on her way. Every minute she stood there, the bread in her bag was getting soggier, and the image of her son's waiting face grew more vivid in her mind. Her own life was a storm she barely navigated. What right did she have to try and shelter someone else? Arthur's voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and deep, a stark contrast to the frantic energy surrounding them. He explained that he had been on his way to an important appointment, a consultation that had taken months to secure, but the sudden storm had completely scrambled his senses. The familiar sounds of the city, the traffic lights, the pedestrian signals, the echo of footsteps were all drowned out by the thunder and the roar of the rain, leaving him stranded and disoriented. He wasn't asking for help, but his quiet dignity and the subtle tremor in his hand as he gripped his cane told a story of profound vulnerability. Clara looked down the street in the direction of her apartment, then back at the lost man beside her. She knew helping him would mean more than just a delay. It would mean a detour, a sacrifice of her precious, limited time. A quiet voice inside her, the one that always pushed her to be better than her circumstances, made the decision for her. She saw in his isolation a mirror of her own, the feeling of being one small misstep away from being overwhelmed by the world. Ignoring the frantic ticking of the clock in her head, she took a steadying breath. "My son can wait a little longer," she murmured to herself. Then louder, she spoke to Arthur. "Where is your appointment? It's no trouble. I can walk you there." The words felt heavy and true as they left her lips. She shifted the now precarious grocery bag to her other hip, a silent commitment to this stranger's journey, making his path her own, if only for a few city blocks. It was a choice made not of logic, but of a fundamental, unshakable empathy. As if on cue, the universe decided to test her resolve. Just as they took their first steps together, the rain-weakened paper of her grocery bag finally surrendered. With a soft, sickening tear, the bottom gave out. An apple rolled into a gutter, a carton of eggs cracked on the pavement, and the milk she had carefully budgeted for bled into a murky puddle. A sharp, stinging frustration brought tears to Clara's eyes. It was a small, mundane disaster, but it felt monumental, a symbol of how one good deed could unravel her carefully constructed stability. For a fleeting, bitter moment, she regretted everything. She could have been home by now, the groceries safely on her counter. Instead, she was standing in the rain with a stranger, watching her hard-earned money wash away into the storm drain. Hearing the sound of the spill and her choked gasp, Arthur immediately stopped, his face a mask of profound apology. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice filled with a genuine distress that cut through Clara's frustration. "Please, let me pay for it." But Clara, looking at the small, ruined pile of food, simply shook her head, a gesture he couldn't see but seemed to feel. "It's just stuff," she replied, her voice shaky but firm. She abandoned the ruined items, salvaging only a small loaf of bread. With a renewed sense of purpose that surprised even herself, she tucked the bread under her arm and gently took his elbow. "Come on," she urged, her grip now confident. "You can't be late for your appointment." They moved forward as one, leaving the small mess behind, bound by a shared moment of loss and an unspoken promise. The walk to Arthur's appointment was a slow, deliberate procession, a stark contrast to the city's frantic pace. Clara held the umbrella steady with one hand, her other arm linked through his, guiding him around puddles and uneven pavement. The small canopy created an intimate world for two, a bubble of quiet cooperation against the storm's chaotic assault. She could feel the steady strength in his arm, a quiet resilience that belied his apparent vulnerability. The cold rain dripped from the edges of the umbrella, but within their shared space, a subtle warmth began to grow, generated not by heat, but by the simple, profound act of human connection. She became acutely aware of the rhythm of their steps, the soft tap of his cane, and the sound of their breathing, a quiet melody woven into the loud percussion of the downpour. This was more than just a detour. It was a shared journey. To break the comfortable silence, Clara asked a simple question, her voice soft. "Do you navigate the city like this often?" She was careful to keep any hint of pity from her tone, genuinely curious about his world. Arthur smiled faintly, a gentle expression that seemed to light up his face. "Often," he confirmed, "but not usually in a hurricane. The world is a map of sounds to me. The echo of a building tells me how tall it is. The hum of a traffic light box tells me when it's safe to cross. Today, the storm washed all the landmarks away." He spoke of his condition not as a tragedy, but as a different way of experiencing life, a puzzle he had learned to solve. Clara listened, fascinated, realizing she was not guiding a helpless man, but walking beside an expert navigator whose tools were simply different from her own. Her thoughts drifted back to her son, Leo, and the reason for her initial haste. "I was rushing home to my little boy," she found herself confessing, the words tumbling out unexpectedly. "He'll be wondering where I am. He always worries." It was a small personal admission, a window into her life she rarely opened for strangers. Arthur's head tilted slightly, a sign of deep listening. "A mother's kindness is a powerful force," he said, his voice imbued with a quiet, knowing wisdom. "It doesn't surprise me that you stopped." His observation was so direct, so perceptive, that it caught Clara off guard. In that moment, she felt seen, truly seen, by a man who could not see at all. It was a profound and unsettling feeling, a connection forged in the heart of the storm. They finally arrived at a sleek, modern building made of glass and steel, its name etched in discreet letters, the Michelson Institute for Advanced Ophthalmology. It was not the simple doctor's office Clara had imagined. It looked more like a futuristic research center, a place where miracles were engineered. A flicker of confusion crossed her mind. Why would Arthur, a man who seemed so at peace with his world, have an appointment at a place dedicated to restoring sight? It felt like a contradiction, a piece of his story that didn't quite fit. As he prepared to enter, she felt a pang of curiosity, a sense that there was a much deeper narrative unfolding than the one she had stumbled into. The quiet dignity he carried suddenly seemed less like acceptance and more like a patient, unwavering hope. Arthur turned to her at the building's entrance, the automatic doors sliding open to reveal a bright, sterile lobby. "I can't thank you enough, Clara," he said, and the way he spoke her name, which she hadn't realized she'd told him, sent a shiver down her spine. "You were a light in a very loud darkness." She simply nodded, unable to find the right words, feeling the strange weight of their brief encounter. As she turned and walked away, the rain finally beginning to soften, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just played a small part in a story far grander than her own. She glanced back one last time, but he was already gone, swallowed by the bright promise of the building. She dismissed the strange feeling, never imagining that the door he had walked through would one day open a path to save her entire world. Inside the pristine, silent walls of the Michelson Institute, the storm outside seemed a world away. Arthur sat in a leather chair that felt cold and impersonal against his back, facing a man whose voice was calm but carried the undeniable weight of authority. This was Dr. Alistair Finch, the architect of a new, experimental procedure that promised not just to mend, but to rebuild the very pathways of sight. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the low hum of advanced machinery, a sterile symphony of hope and risk. Arthur had spent years on waiting lists, undergoing countless tests and evaluations, all leading to this single, pivotal moment. The doctor's words were precise, outlining the low probability of success and the significant dangers involved. It was a final chance, A door to a world he had long since relegated to memory, but the key to unlock it was forged from immense peril. His mind drifted back, pulled into the vortex of a memory he could never escape. It wasn't a slow fade into darkness, but a sudden, violent theft. A screech of tires on a sun-drenched afternoon, the shattering of glass that sounded like a million tiny bells, and then an impact that ripped the world apart. He had been driving his wife, Eleanor, laughing beside him, her hand resting on his. They were on their way to pick up their son from his first day of school. The other driver, a reckless youth in a sports car, had run a red light. Arthur woke up in a hospital weeks later to two new realities, a world of perpetual night and a silence where Eleanor's laughter used to be. His blindness was not just a condition, it was a monument to his loss, a constant, physical reminder of the life that had been stolen from him in a single, brutal instant. Dr. Finch's voice pulled him back to the present. He explained that the procedure would require a level of precision that bordered on the impossible, a delicate dance with nerves that had been dormant for years. Failure could mean permanent damage, leaving him worse off than before. The financial cost was another mountain to climb, a sum that would consume every last penny of the settlement he had received after the accident. It was the price of a miracle. For years, Arthur had found a quiet resignation in his darkness, learning to navigate the world through sound and touch. But the memory of his wife's smile, of his son's bright eyes, was a ghost that haunted him, a visual echo he refused to let fade completely. This surgery was not just about seeing again, it was about reclaiming a piece of the life that had been so unjustly taken from him. He thought of the woman in the storm, Clara. Her sudden, unexpected kindness had been a flicker of light in his sound-drowned world. In the middle of chaos, a stranger had offered him shelter, guided him with a gentle hand, and asked for nothing in return. She had spoken of her son, her voice filled with a fierce, protective love that he recognized instantly. That small, selfless act had pierced through his carefully constructed defenses, reminding him that even in a world capable of immense cruelty, profound goodness still existed. It was a world he wanted to see again, not just for himself, but to bear witness to that kind of light, to see the faces of people like her, to honor the memory of Eleanor by choosing hope over despair. Her simple gesture had become the final, deciding factor in his monumental choice. With a slow, deliberate nod, Arthur gave his answer, "I'll do it." The words were quiet, but held the force of a lifetime of grief and a universe of hope. He felt the smooth plastic of a pen being placed into his hand, and a nurse gently guided his fingers to the signature line on the consent forms. He signed away his savings, signed away his familiar, dark world, and placed his entire being into the hands of this one man and his unproven science. A profound sense of calm settled over him as he leaned back in the chair. He had made his choice. He was stepping off a cliff, praying that he would learn to fly on the way down. But what he didn't know was that fate was already weaving the threads of his life with Clara's, preparing to return her small act of kindness as the miracle that would one day save her world. Years melted away like snow in the spring, each one a struggle, a small victory, a testament to Clara's unwavering love for her son, Leo. But time, which had been a gentle river, suddenly became a raging torrent. A playground accident, a frantic call, the wail of a siren. The world dissolved into a blur of fear and flashing lights. Now she sat on a cold, sterile chair in a hospital waiting room, the antiseptic smell a suffocating presence. The vibrant chaos of the city outside was muted by thick glass, replaced by the hushed whispers of nurses and the rhythmic, terrifying beep of distant monitors. Every tick of the clock on the wall was a hammer blow to her heart. Leo's life was in the hands of a surgeon, a brilliant but anonymous specialist whose name she had only heard in reverent, hopeful tones, Dr. Arthur Michelson. A nurse with kind, tired eyes finally approached, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. The words Clara had been praying for, begging for, spilled into the silent room. The surgery was a success. Your son is stable. Relief, so potent and overwhelming, crashed over Clara, leaving her weak and trembling. She buried her face in her hands, a sob of pure, unadulterated gratitude escaping her lips. The world, which had been grey and terrifying, was suddenly flooded with colour. The nurse continued, her voice gentle. "Dr. Michelson would like to speak with you. He's on his way now." Clara nodded, wiping her tears, composing herself to thank the man who had pulled her son back from the brink, the faceless hero who had just returned her entire world to her. She pictured an older, stern-looking man, a genius with hands blessed by God. The door to the private waiting area opened, and a man in pale blue scrubs entered. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his posture radiating a calm authority that instantly commanded the room. Clara rose to her feet, her heart pounding with a mixture of awe and immense thankfulness. She looked at his face, searching for the features of the savior she had imagined. He had kind eyes, flecked with gold, and a gentle expression that seemed to hold a universe of empathy. He looked directly at her, a flicker of recognition in his gaze that she found strange, but dismissed as a trick of her exhausted mind. He was about to speak, and she held her breath, ready to offer a lifetime of thanks for what he had done for her and for Leo. "It's been a long time, Clara." The voice, it wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was deep, calm, and resonant, a sound that bypassed her ears and struck a chord deep within her memory. It was the voice from the storm, the voice that had described a world mapped by sound, the voice of the man she had sheltered under her flimsy umbrella all those years ago. Her mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the impossible. The blind man, lost and vulnerable in the rain, was standing before her now as the renowned surgeon who had just performed a miracle with his own 2 hands. His eyes, the same eyes that had been unseeing and empty, were now sharp, focused, and looking directly into her soul. Time folded in on itself, the past and present colliding in one earth-shattering moment of disbelief. He offered a small, knowing smile, the very same one she remembered from that rain-soaked afternoon. "You were a light in a very loud darkness," he said softly, quoting the last words he had ever spoken to her. The confirmation was a jolt that sent her stumbling back a step, her hand flying to her mouth. Arthur. It was Arthur. The world tilted, spinning violently off its axis. The sterile hospital room, the successful surgery, her son's life. It all became part of a story that had begun with a simple, forgotten act of kindness in a thunderstorm. The man whose path she had briefly illuminated had just become the sole beacon in the darkest storm of her life. Nothing made sense. The stranger she had helped and the hero who had saved her son were one and the same. A revelation so profound it left her breathless, suspended in a state of pure, unadulterated shock. The initial wave of shock receded, leaving behind a cold, sharp-edged reality. Clara's mind raced, connecting the dots with a dizzying speed that left her feeling nauseous. The Michelson Institute, Dr. Arthur Michelson. The name wasn't just a coincidence. It was his name on the building where she had left him all those years ago. He hadn't just been a patient, he was the institution itself, the man she had pitied. The vulnerable figure she had sheltered from the rain was a titan of medicine, a man of immense wealth and influence. A sudden, hot flush of shame washed over her. She looked down at her own worn-out shoes, the fraying cuff of her sleeve. The memory, once a small, private treasure of her own goodness, now felt like a story he might tell at a dinner party, a quaint anecdote about the poor, kind woman who helped him before his grand success. The power imbalance was a chasm that had opened at her feet, and she felt herself falling, Arthur, seeing the complex storm of emotions on her face, mistook her stunned silence for overwhelming gratitude. He took a step closer, his voice filled with a warmth that now felt suffocating to her. "I never forgot you, Clara. After the surgery, I tried to find you. I wanted to repay you, to make sure you and your son were taken care of." His words, meant to be a comfort, were like salt on a fresh wound. Repay her. The phrase echoed in her mind, cheapening the one selfless act she clung to in her difficult life. He saw her not as a fellow human who had shown him a moment of grace, but as a debt to be settled, a line item in the grand ledger of his miraculous life. Her kindness was being reduced to a transaction, and her pride, the fierce, brittle armor that had protected her through years of struggle, began to crack under the weight of his well-intentioned charity. Her expression hardened, the tears of relief freezing into chips of ice. She finally found her voice, but it was a stranger's, thin, cold, and distant. "You don't owe me anything," she said, the words clipped and precise. She looked at him, but not at the man from the storm. She looked at the powerful surgeon, the wealthy benefactor. "What I did, it wasn't for a reward. I helped a man who needed help. That's all. I didn't know who you were, and it wouldn't have mattered." The unspoken accusation hung heavily in the air between them. "Your world and my world are not the same, and your attempt to bridge them with money is an insult." The miraculous, heart-warming connection that had just been revealed was now severed by the invisible, cutting wires of class, pride, and misunderstanding. She had built a wall around her heart in an instant, and he was on the other side. Arthur was completely blindsided by her reaction. The warmth in his eyes faded, replaced by a look of profound confusion and hurt. He had replayed this moment in his mind 1,000 times, and in every version, it ended in tears of joyful recognition, not this cold, painful rejection. He couldn't comprehend the source of her sudden distance. To him, this was the beautiful, symmetrical closing of a circle, a testament to the power of a single kind act. "Clara, please," he began, his voice losing its confident calm. "That's not what I meant. Your kindness. It was the reason I went through with the surgery. It reminded me there was a world worth seeing again." But his explanation was lost on her. He was speaking a language of destiny and connection, while she was trapped in the grammar of survival and pride. He saw the pain in her face, but misinterpreted its cause, unable to see the deep wound his offer of repayment had inflicted. With a final, heartbreaking glance, Clara turned away from him, her posture rigid. "I need to go see my son," she whispered, using the truth as an excuse to flee. The name that had just been a source of immense relief was now a shield she held up against him. She walked out of the room without looking back, leaving Arthur standing alone in the sterile silence, the miraculous reunion crumbling into dust around him. The air, which moments ago had crackled with the electricity of fate, was now thick with the sorrow of a connection broken by the very weight of the miracle it had created. He was left with an agonizing question. Had he saved a boy's life only to lose the one person who had inspired him to have the power to do so? The chasm between them seemed impossibly wide, and forgiveness for a wound he didn't even understand felt a world away. For days, Arthur found himself adrift in a sea of confusion, the sterile corridors of the hospital feeling colder and more isolating than ever before. He performed his duties with mechanical precision, his hands steady, but his mind was a storm of replayed conversations and misunderstood intentions. The joy of his success with Leo was tainted by the profound failure of his reunion with Clara. He walked through the institute that bore his name, a testament to his journey from darkness to light, but felt a new kind of blindness. He had been so focused on the grand, poetic symmetry of their story that he had failed to see the human being standing before him. He had seen her through the lens of his own narrative, as a character in his miracle, not as a woman with her own fierce pride, her own history of struggle, and her own profound dignity. The realization dawned on him slowly, painfully. He had offered her money when she had given him hope, a currency so infinitely more valuable. He finally found her in the small, quiet solarium at the end of the pediatric ward, a glass room filled with wilting plants and the pale light of a late afternoon sun. She was sitting alone, staring out at the city skyline, looking impossibly small and weary. The fight had gone out of her posture, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Arthur approached slowly, the soft soles of his shoes making no sound on the tiled floor. He didn't wear his doctor's coat. He was just in simple slacks and a sweater, a deliberate shedding of the status that had become a wall between them. He stopped a few feet away, not wanting to crowd her. "That's it, Clara," he said, his voice soft, stripped of all authority, holding only the quiet humility of the man she had met in the rain. "Can I sit with you for a moment? Not as a doctor, just as Arthur." She didn't turn to look at him, but she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. He sat in the chair beside hers, leaving a respectful space between them. For a long moment, they watched the city lights begin to flicker on as dusk settled. "I was wrong," Arthur began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The words I used, they were clumsy and insulting. I didn't mean to offer you a transaction. There is no price for what you did for me that day. You didn't just shield me from a storm. You reminded me that there was still light in the world, even if I couldn't see it. Your kindness wasn't a catalyst for my surgery, Clara. It was the entire reason for it. I wanted to see the world that still had people like you in it. I'm so deeply sorry for wounding your pride." Clara finally turned her head, and he saw the glistening tracks of silent tears on her cheeks. The hard, protective shell she had built around herself had dissolved, revealing the raw vulnerability beneath. "I've spent my entire life feeling invisible," she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "To everyone, I'm just a single mother, a cashier, someone who is struggling. When you helped my son, you were this larger-than-life hero. And then, when you offered to repay me, it felt like you were putting me back in that small box. It felt like the one good, pure thing I ever did was just another debt to be settled by a rich man." Her words were not an accusation, but a painful, honest confession that laid her own heart bare. She was finally allowing him to see the world from her side of the chasm. Arthur closed the small space between them, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the arm of the chair. It was a simple, grounding touch, an echo of the way she had taken his arm all those years ago. "Your kindness was never a small thing, Clara. It was everything," he said, his voice full of a conviction that left no room for doubt. "It was the beginning of this story, for both of us." In the quiet of the solarium, surrounded by the gentle hum of the hospital and the twinkling lights of a city that no longer felt hostile, the misunderstanding dissolved. The pride and the shame melted away, replaced by a profound, shared understanding. They were not a surgeon and a patient's mother. They were two souls whose paths had crossed in a storm, only to find that they were destined to be each other's shelter. The healing had finally begun. Months later, the world was no longer a place of harsh storms or sterile, silent hallways. It was a sun-drenched park on a Tuesday afternoon, vibrant with the shouts and laughter of children. Leo, his energy boundless and his health fully restored, chased a bright red ball across a field of green, his movements a testament to a miracle. Clara watched him, not from the edge of a cold hospital chair, but from a comfortable wooden bench, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Beside her sat Arthur, his gaze following her son, his eyes, once lost to darkness, now able to drink in the brilliant colors of the world. The warmth of the sun on their faces was a gentle benediction, a quiet promise that after the longest, darkest rains, the light will always, eventually, return. Their new life was a quiet symphony composed of ordinary, beautiful moments. The journey that had brought them to this peaceful afternoon was a map of impossible coincidences and profound connections. It serves as a powerful reminder that life rarely moves in a straight line. Sometimes, what feels like a costly delay, a missed bus, a forgotten umbrella, a detour to help a stranger in a storm, is actually the universe gently nudging you onto the path you were always meant to walk. A single choice, born from a moment of pure empathy, can plant a seed that lies dormant for years, only to blossom into a life-saving miracle at the exact moment you have lost all hope. Clara's small act of sheltering a stranger from the rain did not just save him from a storm, it set in motion the very events that would one day save her from her own. Their bond was no longer defined by a past debt or a miraculous surgery, but by the simple, shared rhythm of their days. They had become a family, forged not by law or by blood, but by the unbreakable ties of shared vulnerability and profound gratitude. He taught Leo how to identify birds by their songs, a skill from his former life, while Clara taught Arthur the simple joy of watching clouds drift across a blue sky, a gift from his new one. They filled the empty spaces in each other's lives, their separate stories of loss and struggle weaving together to create a single, resilient narrative of hope. In helping him, she had found her hero. In saving her son, he had found his home. They were no longer two separate souls who had collided in a storm, but a single harbor against any future tempests. This is the quiet, powerful truth of our existence. A single act of kindness can echo through time, returning as a miracle when you need it most. It is a boomerang of grace, sent out into the world with no expectation of return, only to find its way back to you in your darkest hour. The shelter you offer to a stranger today might just become the foundation of the home that saves you tomorrow. We are all connected by these invisible threads of compassion, and every selfless gesture strengthens the fabric that holds us all together. If this story has reminded you of the incredible power held within a simple, kind act, consider sharing it and become a part of that beautiful, unending echo of hope and light in the world. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Leo ran back to them, his face flushed with joy. He threw his arms around both Arthur and Clara, pulling them into a tight, warm embrace. In that perfect, silent moment, the world narrowed to the feeling of a small boy's hug, the warmth of the setting sun, and the shared, steady beating of three grateful hearts. Arthur looked at Clara over their son's head, his eyes reflecting the golden light, and in his gaze, she saw not a hero or a surgeon, but the man from the storm, her partner in the beautiful, unpredictable dance of fate. The storm had passed, and in its wake it had left behind a world more vibrant, more connected, and more full of love than she had ever imagined possible.